Welcome back to Simming History, where we look at the history of architecture through the lens of The Sims. Before we get started today, if you like the video, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. Today we're looking at the vernacular type in a viewer request from Singapore, the Shophouse. The history of the Shophouse starts with the history of Singapore. In 1819, Sir Stamford Raffles, a British politician and empire builder, founded Singapore as a trading post. In 1822, he issued several ordinances defining the urban design and building type he wanted to see in his new city. The new Chinese immigrants to the city adapted their native shophouse to these ordinances, and thus the Singapore Shophouse was born. The shophouse is a long, narrow house with party or shared walls on each side. They are 2 or 3 story, depending on the style, with a shop on the first floor, an apartment for the proprietor behind and above. The ground floor would have housed the shop, a family gathering space, including a dining space, and the air well garden. The floors above would have held 3 bedrooms each, with a possible terrace over the kitchen on the second floor, or the first floor for those of you outside the US. At ground level, the second floor overhangs what is called the 5-foot way, which was dictated by Raffles. The 5-foot way provides a covered public walk on both sides of the street to provide shade from the sun and protection from rain. The house has a pitched clay tile roof and a central airwell. The airwell provides air and light to the interior of the upper apartment via shuttered windows and was completely open on the ground floor. The airwells are essential to be comfortable in the tropical climate. There is a rear court at the back of the house, which traditionally would have served as the kitchen, toilet, and delivery space. The timber windows would have just been made of wood jalousie historically, with glass slowly being added over time. Only the front facade changed over the eras in response to the latest styles. The shophouse, of course, is a vernacular type, designed by people for a specific place in response to culture and climate. However, it also has several styles. We're going to run through a couple of those real quick. First, the early shophouse. These were built between about 1840 to 1900. They were 2-story with 1 or 2 windows. There were minimal ornamentation, the 5-foot way, of course, with wooden jalousie windows and clay-tiled roofs. And they were typically monochromatic. Best identified for being kind of short and kind of squat. Then there was the first transitional style, which was sort of the early 1900s. The stories were taller than its predecessor, and it was overall more vertical with usually 3 floors. There was some decoration, including plaster and tiles. There was appearance of glass in the windows, along with the shutters, arched transoms, and pastel color palettes. Next, we have what is known as either the late shophouse style or the eclectic shophouse style or the Chinese shophouse style. They were built between 1900 and 1940. They made extensive use of decorative moldings, particularly floral and garland motifs. They made heavy use of plaster moldings, carved wood, and glazed tiles from China. These were largely built by the Chinese immigrants in Singapore. They are typically the most ornate, and they are also typically the most colorful. Then we had the second transitional style, which was built in the late 1930s. They were more simple and streamlined than the late shophouse style, And it's sort of a mix between late Shophouse and first transitional, with tiles and some Art Deco ornamentation starting to be introduced and some geometric designs. The color palette was more muted, but it was still present. But it didn't stop there. There are also Art Deco shophouses and even modern shophouses, the modern ones having built between 1950s and 1960s, which I'm not building here because they are not specific to Singapore. Art Deco and modern are both international styles that can be found all over the globe. Whereas the early transitional, first transitional, second transitional, and late shophouse styles are Singapore specific. It would be understandable if you thought the historic Singaporean shophouse was in danger, like most vernacular architecture types that we run across, but in this instance, thankfully, you would be very wrong, although that wasn't always the case. Shophouses are currently thriving in Singapore, becoming such a hot commodity that the cost per square foot exceeds that of Manhattan's Upper Fifth Avenue. Why? For several reasons. After Singapore became independent in 1965, in the 1980s, the government began a conservation effort to preserve their cultural heritage, and they actually included architecture. Several historic districts were created, and those areas were designated for conservation, turning rundown and city districts into historic hotspots. These days, the shophouse is extremely desired for their cultural value, but also because in a city where residential sales are limited to locals, it is one of the few properties foreigners can buy because of its commercial designation. Shophouses today are a mix of private homes, bougie restaurants, and boutique or high-end fashion stores, not to mention hotels. Which means if you were to go to Singapore, you could eat in a shophouse, you could shop in a shophouse, and you could even sleep in a shophouse. Thanks for joining me today for the Singaporean shophouse. Until next time, you can find me on Instagram at Simming History very occasionally, but definitely on the Sims 4 gallery, where there are playable versions of this and many other builds on this channel. Thank you to all the new subs. If you haven't yet, hit subscribe. I will see you all next time. Until then, bye.